like to reconvene the meeting of the Board of Public Utilities.
So, Vice Chair, I'll just report that we had a closed session. It was noted on the agenda, and there's nothing to report.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes ready for approval, and if there's no comments on any of them, then they will be approved. Okay. We're at item 6.1, Quarterly Capital Improvement Program Projects Update.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Cowan, members of the board. This update will highlight construction projects being delivered by Capital Projects Engineering. Before we get into the individual projects, here's the expenditure summary for all CI projects in the last quarter. Approximately 85% of the expenditures were for local sewer and water, and 10% of the expenditures were for Laguna Treatment Plant. A portion of the superstructure for the primary treatment at the Laguna Treatment Plant was removed. This is part of the first phase of the seismic upgrades for the plant. It's currently in punch list phase, and the total contract amount was $1.8 million. At Melbrook Way, emergency repairs were made for a failed storm drain outfall. The project is substantially complete, and the amount of the contract was $100,000. Sewer mains were replaced at Post Court and Simpson Place. The purpose of the project was to reduce maintenance expenditures. Post Court had a severe sag in it, and the laterals had insufficient slope. Simpson Place had several dips and a deteriorated invert. The project cost was just over $500,000. Construction is expected to be complete in mid-December. Improvements are being made to the Spring Lake lift station. The project will address settlement issues on the site by reconstructing with engineered structural fill. Upgrades to the lift station will include new controls, backup generator, lighting, fencing, and a new concrete pad. The total contract amount is approximately $700,000, and construction is expected to be complete in January of 2018. Approximately 1,000 feet of sewer was replaced on Stony Point Road. Our goal is to have the base paving course complete by the end of this year, with the surface paving and project completion in the spring. Some of the projects that you'll be hearing more about in the future include the Mohawk lift station, which will be upgraded to replace the deteriorated wet well and to install more efficient pumps. The project will replace old sewer mains and water mains in Yuma Court, Sioux Street, and Mohawk Street. Construction will begin this month. The total contract amount is $2.3 million. The Farmers Lane water treatment plant requires rehab in order to increase water delivery from the wells. The improvements to the plant include removal of the existing booster pumps, electrical equipment, and booster pump building. And turbine pumps will be installed with their associated electrical equipment. The filtration will be refurbished, Backwash equipment will be installed, and there will also be installation of tanks to remove in-train gases. Construction is expected to start next spring. Information on CIP projects can be found on our CIP website at srcity.org/CIP. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you for the update. We actually have one public comment on this item. Mr. DeWitt.
I'll speak from up here if I may. Well, actually, I'll come down there. It's easier, I guess. Thank you, folks. My name is Dwayne DeWitt from Roseland in the city of Santa Rosa. Proud to be here. I wanted to come back and speak with you about capital improvement projects because essentially it's really important that you folks don't be distracted because of the recent calamity and make like, okay, we'll put some of this stuff to the side. Actually, you need to be right on it all the time so we don't have any type of a buildup that creates difficulties in the future. And I would just ask, whenever you're dealing with lift stations, pump stations, any type of repair or rehabilitation of that infrastructure, you try to use fireproof materials whenever possible. Some people will say, well, it's a cost issue. Actually, we see now that it saves money to be better prepared in the beginning, and you can rationalize it now. You can point to this and say, hey, because of that. And so critics will have to, as we used to say in the military, put up your proof. All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Are there any board member comments or questions? Seeing none, we will move on to item 6.2, fire recovery activities.
We're going to have Deputy Director Schiavone and Deputy Director Miller give us an update on the status of our operational infrastructure activities and watershed activities, respectively. Before we go into that, I wanted to provide an update to some items that may not be covered in their updates based on questions that the board had at the last meeting. So I'll briefly go through these. There was a question in regards to street sweeping and air quality, and we have been working with all the various folks out there supporting that kind of activity to ensure there's water trucks and sprays going in to keep the dust down. Of course, now it's raining, but I hope that helped address some of the concerns that were in place. There was a couple questions regarding homeowners that kept their sprinklers on for fire suppression, that may have used their home water to help with neighbors in terms of controlling the fire. And is there anything that the city can do in regards to the cost of the water? We've looked into that, and at the next board meeting, we are scheduling a proposal for your consideration to reduce the cost of the excess water that was used for this event to what we pay for the water, so that's the actual cost of the water from the water agency, about 30% roughly compared to what they would otherwise have to pay. And of course, there'd be no sewer component on that usage. So I believe that will be reflective of the direction we've gotten, the interest we've gotten from the board and the council to do what we can in a reasonable way, consistent with our overall rate structure. So you'll be seeing that at the next meeting. There was another question in regard for strategies to incentivize rebuilds and additional housing units, including an approach for ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And we are looking at an approach consistent with other fees and charges that the city generally applies for new construction activities to see what we could do, and we do anticipate in the near term to bring a recommendation to the board and then to council on specifically the ADUs, at least for some interim period, a way to reduce the water and sewer connection fees or demand fees associated with a building permit for those units, yet still being very cognizant that unlike other fees and charges the city applies, we're governed by Proposition 218 and we do have constraints. And we don't want to create a model that could disrupt that very important revenue source that comes broadly from the building of new properties and exerting demands on our system. So you'll be receiving that information as well as at an upcoming meeting. I think the other issues will be addressed in the update. There's one outstanding one I wanted to note regarding approaches with the H2O program and could that fit into the overall relief, and we are looking at that in addition to the other things, so we'll be able to report out on that at a later meeting. With that, if there's any questions on these items, otherwise we can turn to Deputy Director Schiavone.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Khan, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an update for our sewer and water systems. Our repairs and inspections include both large and small items, and all of these are essential to our system. For example, our damaged infrastructure includes items like air relief valves, or as we refer to them, ARVs. We inspected 132 of these and found that 21 of them needed repair or replacement. Unfortunately, this work has been completed. We've also inspected approximately 606 of the fire hydrants in the damaged area, with about 10% of them also needing repair or replacement, and a good portion of that work has been completed as well. And we've had other items such as, melted antennas on our new water meters that were installed in the Coffee Park area, but fortunately those appear to still be reading. Our water quality team has been busy with increased flushing and water quality monitoring, and we are monitoring the water distribution system in the burned areas carefully and more frequently than was necessary prior to the fire. We are seeing much less demand than our system was designed for or designed to handle, and we are constantly adjusting to make sure that we meet our water quality requirements. Our collection system cleaning crews and camera crews are monitoring the sewer mains in the burned areas. This includes sending our cameras through selected mains after rain events to see the impact that the rain is having. And we are cleaning mains throughout the burned area because this also gives us an idea of what's happening to our system by seeing the debris that's coming back. The results of these activities will show us quickly if we have any changes as the rain increases. As we mentioned in our last update, we did have some damage to the properties around our water pump stations. And at some locations we had damaged roofs over our control and generator rooms. And many of our stations had damage to smaller items like fencing and the necessary lighting at the station. And although these items may seem like small repairs, we were having to trim and remove damaged trees and propane tanks that were causing safety concerns at these locations before we could start making these repairs and operating normally again. We're also working on large equipment that needs repair, like our stationary generators at our pump and lift stations. We ran our stationary generators to provide power for over a week at some of our pump stations, and this extended runtime was stressful for this machinery. We've already had a consultant come out and inspect 13 of these generators, and they're providing us with a status report on each unit, and we're making provisions to make sure that they're operating now. We do anticipate that some of them will need to be replaced. And an area of serious concern for us as the rainy weather increases is our sewer lift stations in the Fountain Grove area. 2 of the 3 badly damaged lift stations are being serviced by our combination trucks right now, and they are not able to operate on their own. This is really not how we want that to operate, so we're doing what we can to put some type of temporary measure in place. The 3rd lift station that was badly damaged is operating on its own, but the stationary generator was destroyed in the fire. Sky Farm A is a high priority for us. This is a lift station towards the top of Sky Farm Drive near St. Andrews. And this lift station is presenting the greatest challenges at this point. It is a complex lift station and requires a pumping system that will deliver a head pressure that's high enough to push it over the hill to a gravity main. And this lift station is actually designed to operate through a multi-pump operation, not a single pump. And the multi-pump configuration is not feasible with the remaining infrastructure that's in place after the fire. So we're working on a temporary solution that will use a single pump to do the work of both of those pumps. We're moving forward with that in several avenues, both purchasing a pump for a long-term temporary solution and working with rental companies as well to try to get something in there quickly. At our last update, we mentioned the need for sewer lateral capping. This work has started, but it is not completed. And we anticipate many of the damaged laterals to be capped by the Army Corps contractors at most of the residential sites they are removing the debris from, but we know that that's not the case. And because we know that some of the laterals will need to be capped before the Army Corps has moved into a specific damaged area, Water is also creating a contract for lateral capping. We need to make sure this happens so that we can protect our system quickly, and we're moving forward and monitoring the effects of this right now. So as things progress and we move forward, we will continue to update you on the status and let you know how we're progressing and moving towards normal operations. And now I will ask Deputy Director Miller to give you an update on the stormwater system.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Count and members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity to present a brief glimpse at what's been happening with the Watershed Task Force over the last couple weeks. There's been a lot of activity. So as you may recall, shortly after the fire was contained, a Watershed Task Force was formed to support communications between the city, the county, local agencies, state and federal agencies, and the task force has been able to really support our ability to collaborate on the most beneficial actions to support and protect the watershed. So I think I reported at the last meeting that as a result of the concerns presented in the state's draft work report, which is the Watershed Emergency Response Team report, it was a report that basically evaluated the soil burn severity in the watershed, and based on the soil burn severity, which was determined through some satellite imagery and then field confirmation of that severity index, they put those values in models that determined increased risk for landslide, erosion, and flooding. And the draft report was produced several weeks ago, and based on the concerns in that report for increased risk, the state informally determined that the watershed was in an emergency and needed some additional assessment and quick response. So they called CAL FIRE crews to come back and help us out. So CAL FIRE arrived 2 weeks ago, and they immediately brought an incident managed team structure to the Watershed Task Force, and our ability to get things done in the watershed shot up exponentially. Immediately upon arrival, the Watershed Task Force coordinated with the CAL FIRE team to develop a strategic plan for their mission, and they were basically focused on serving, safeguarding, and protecting the citizens, cultural and natural resources within the watershed of the county. So CAL FIRE follows an incident command process that ensures that watershed risks are identified, communicated, and mitigated through a hazard risk assessment process. It's been an amazing and inspiring effort to be involved with. They get things done quickly, effectively and efficiently. So initially their work was targeted on the the risks that were identified in this WIRT report. The WIRT includes specific evaluations of properties or infrastructure called VARs, V-A-R. It's called a value at risk. So they initially looked at the VARs that had risk to life property infrastructure within the burned areas. A lot of their work initially was focused on clearing debris from culverts and streams in the Mark West watershed to reduce the risk of debris flow, culvert clogging, and the resultant risk of flooding of properties and downstream areas. So as you may know, there are portions of the Mark West watershed that had been considered pristine habitat for our endangered salmonids. And so they wanted to basically reduce any further damage to that area of the watershed. And they have been actively working on clearing that debris, clearing the culverts. I think that from the last report, they started that work 2 weeks ago and they're about 90% done. So it's been pretty amazing to have them continue that effort. So in addition, in the city, their crews were able to help us with some erosion protection measures. They initially installed straw wattle erosion controls up in the steep areas of Fountain Grove along some of the roads that we specifically identified. Yesterday, the CAL FIRE crews were able to perform an emergency immediate mission to adjust the storm drain inlet protection measures that were up in Fountain Grove that were set up to be filter too much. They basically were blocking the flow into the storm drains and increasing the risk of localized flooding. So their crews helped us to adjust the best management practices out there to basically maximize preventing the debris flow into the storm drains and minimizing the chance of localized flooding on the roadways. So along with the CAL FIRE crews that were actually boots on the ground to get things done, the state also sent geotech and engineering specialists to us to help us do a preliminary evaluation of the burned areas, especially in the steep areas of Fountain Grove. This was a sort of ground truthing of the report. Early last week, these experts accompanied city staff to evaluate some burned sections of the storm drain that had been previously called out through an initial review by our capital projects teams. Our capital projects teams had done a survey of the fire damaged infrastructure, and so we went out with these technical experts, and we actually identified that some of the plastic pipe in storm drain outfalls and in other areas had actually burned completely through. So in one particular location where there was a completely burned out storm drain outfall, there was actually a sinkhole that started to form adjoining a roadway. And essentially as a result of seeing that and realizing that we didn't know how many other locations like that could exist in Fountain Grove, we decided, basically that sinkhole triggered the need for an emergency assessment throughout the entire Fountain Grove area because we didn't know what the risk was like for other sinkholes that could put property infrastructure at risk. Let's see. So late last week, we were able to initiate a mission to CCTV the entire public storm drain system in Fountain Grove and subsequently Coffey Park. Last weekend, we started with a fleet of 6 trucks. That fleet has steadily increased to 16 CCTV trucks as of yesterday. We've used city trucks, state trucks, local agencies have supported us, private contractor trucks, and as of just an hour ago, we've been able to CCTV 99% of the burned public storm drain in Fountain Grove and 95% in Coffey Park. So while the CCTV crews were out there assessing the sections of burned storm drain, if they found any issues, they would immediately send a text with a photo. And in coordination with the initiation of the CCTVing, we also had formed 5 geotechnical teams with geotech experts and engineers to basically immediately follow a report of a burn storm drain with a risk assessment, so that they go out there, take a look at the area adjoining this burn storm drain to determine any risk to life, property, infrastructure, and the environment. So in this process, I think that there were over 30 sections of storm drain that were identified in Fountain Grove that were subsequently reviewed by the geotech teams. About 10 were determined to require immediate urgent action due to the risk presented, whether it's risk to the road or property. And the remaining items will be kept on a list for review over this rainy season. So the emergency mission is nearing its end, and although a number of staff were involved, and I usually try not to call out specific people, in this case I'd like to make an exception and just call out what I consider heroic efforts of Heaven Moore and Lori Urbanik. They were here for long hours this weekend and continuing on into this week to get this work done in an efficient and effective manner. They demonstrated their full, unrelenting commitment to protect the public, and I just have been so inspired by their work. As a result of their efforts and the full support of city staff and management and our partnering local, state, and federal agencies, we've been able to quickly understand and develop appropriate action plans to minimize the risk to the public, to the property, to infrastructure from the burn storm drain infrastructure and to burn slopes in the Fountain Grove area. So these geotech teams not only evaluated the risk based on the burn storm drain sections, but they were also asked to go out and take a look at all of the burn slopes in Fountain Grove, just to determine if they could see any potential slide impacts or anything like that. So it's just been an amazing effort, and fortunately we're soon to be finishing that. Last meeting, I had mentioned our consideration of stormwater runoff diversion from the storm drain system, potentially into our sanitary system and the treatment plant. Wanted to let you know that we were able to collect water quality samples during the last rain, and we're still waiting for the results of those samples, so we haven't been able to continue our evaluation of that potential pilot project. And we'll just continue keeping you posted on how if that proceeds. And before I end my summary, I'd also like to extend huge gratitude to the CAL FIRE team, to our local, state, and federal partners, and a special call out to Chris Graybill, who has been amazing with his multivariate support and efforts with the watershed protections. He's been at so many of the meetings, he's been out in the field, he's been suggesting BMPs, so really appreciate that, Chris. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I really appreciate your attention. If I went into too much detail, I apologize. I didn't have much time to distill what I was going to say in a concise manner, but it's been a very interesting process to be involved with, and I thought that you might be interested based on your kind of technical perspectives, so thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you for going into detail. I know a lot of us appreciate it. Are there any board member questions or comments? Board Member Grable?
I just wanted to second what Rita had said specifically about SR Water staff and CIP staff, and also Rita herself and Director Shivani. They've just gone over and above, and I think people need to recognize that they're also, responsible for their pre-fire duties, and it's all been on top of that. And it's not like they had lax schedules before this, but just what people are capable of under these circumstances is remarkable. But then I think on top of that, we've heard from FEMA and other national organizations that we've exceeded pretty much all of those metrics and expectations for what they've seen in other areas. And I think that really comes down to just the connections between people, their commitments, and then just the depth of thoughtful understanding of these issues, and professional expertise as well. And yet, people like Heaven Moore specifically have endured not just professional, huge professional challenges, but also just maintaining all those relationships with everybody under trauma, under duress, and then just performing amazing, tasks. It's been really inspiring. So thank you guys.
Thank you again to both of you, and thank you to all your staff, and to Heaven and Lori and our very own Chris for doing all this work for our city to get us back up and running again. We're really, really lucky to have you. We're so lucky to have this department where everybody works well together and where there is support up the chain for all of this wonderful work that's going on. So thank you so much. Thank you for your update, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have item 7.1. I know that I want to pull this item from the consent calendar, but first we have public comment from Mr. DeWitt.
My apologies, I'll be right down there. I didn't realize how quick you get to this. My name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. I have hoped that there would be a way for city employees to reach out and utilize those young people who are living under the bridges of Santa Rosa right now, and perhaps have them be helping with some of these outdoor activities. It's really a surprising amount of able-bodied young people that are out there stuck under these bridges right now. I go by there on almost a daily basis, 9th Street, 6th Street, 5th Street, and there's at least 50 to 100 young people, able-bodied people, who I'm sure if somebody said to them, hey, look, you can get some work doing this, and find a way to put them into something productive. When I was young, that's how you got started. You went out and did yard work, you did stuff. And I really believe that if the city could perhaps adopt a more proactive approach, I mean, I know someone will probably complain and say, oh, well, you know, that's competing with my contract business. But, I mean, this is the kind of time where we need to work together. This has come up a number of times during the talks of regeneration. So you folks are the perfect, if you'll excuse the expression, jumping board or, platform for this to begin with, in a sense, because you have spots that need to be taken care of. And that would be an excellent way for people of entry-level skills to get going and help the city. Low-income wages, they don't need to be paid a lot, and it could really be going in a good way. And so I'll be back down during public comment, and that'll be the last you'll see of me today. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on item 7.1? I just had a comment on this. I support this consent item. I understand that staff is still working on the new landscape contract, and I'm really appreciative of that, especially given all of the other stuff that's going on right now. I would just like to make sure that the protocols that we put in place fall 2015 to not use synthetic herbicides on the urban lands is still in place while we are still reviewing the contract. And that's all I wanted to say. Board Member Arnone.
Yeah, I did have a question about this matter, and maybe it's just my lack of familiarity with the work that's been done, but as I read the staff report, it indicated that the initial contract was let for $42,000 or $43,000 for a 4-month contract, and that this action item would add 6 months to that contract at no additional cost to the rates, but the additional 6 months is for $90,000, whereas the first 4 months was for $42,000, and so I don't understand how this is not additional cost.
I see some members of the audience coming down to reply. Thank you.
So I apologize, the buyer who's been involved in this isn't here today, so I'm filling in. But there are certain site visits that you do at each site, and each of the Santa Rosa water sites, it's specified if it's like you visit once a week once a month or twice a year. So what's happening is we're hitting the cycle where people, the visits for the once a year and twice a year are happening in this next contract phase. So it's the same annualized cost of the original contract, but it's broken down by number of site visits.
So is it fair to say that we mean it's consistent with our budget, so there will not be an expense beyond what we budget to address this?
Yes.
Okay, I guess maybe it's just this terminology. Maybe on a per unit basis, it's the same for each site. It's the same cost per site, but we have more sites in this 6-month period than we had in the first 4-month period.
See, if it had been a full year contract, it would make more sense.
Okay. That answers my question. Thank you.
Board Member Dowd.
I am very impressed with Board Member Arnone that he came out and saw that the 6 months was more than 2 months worth of the 4-month deal. So that's very good of you.
It's strange things catch my attention occasionally.
Thank you. With that, I guess I'll entertain the motion.
As a member of Vice Chair Pound's landscape subcommittee, this was a great deal of our discussion is how can we get to the point, maintain our facilities and get to the point where the contract can finally be awarded for the new landscape procedures. So I move for your approval of this.
I'll second it.
Moved by Board Member Dowd, seconded by Board Member Arnone. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Moves unanimously. There are no report items. We do have a public comment on non-agenda matters. And Mr. DeWitt, you're up again.
I'd like to use the overhead, if I may. I know how to set it up as long as it's turned on. All right.
Is this overhead?
It's not financial overhead.
Has it been approved?
Oh, yes, indeed. You'll need to turn it on for me. There we go. Oh, let's get it so it doesn't have a glare. Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland in Santa Rosa. And for a couple of decades, I've come here to this body and advocated that they find ways to perhaps make some money off of our water supply. So I was here recently and spoke to you, and you thought, well, I'm sure that guy, he's just full of these Don Quixote ideas, and they're not going anywhere. But this book, which I had told Mr. Dowd about some years ago, and it never actually gave him the copy to read yet, points out that there's money to be made on selling water that comes from the municipal supply. Now, during this time of an emergency, you folks could be doing something that is creative. So far, you've always been like, oh no, we can't compete with the private sector. This isn't competing. This is talking about utilizing an asset we have, a commodity, and bringing in some funds to help you rebuild Santa Rosa water. So, I've got some examples here today, just to show you. You see them all the time, bottled water, right? Now, if you look at the bottled water, often you'll see that the water doesn't really come from any place special, okay? It comes from the municipal supply of, say, Modesto, or this one from Fastenal in Minnesota, which comes from the Minneapolis water supply, or others that I have here. One of the fun ones is Kirkland. That's the water that comes from the big Costco people. So it just comes from the Seattle system, all right? And then you got Walmart too, but I won't belabor the point so much. I just want you to know that here's these basic containers, all right? And the water in them is pretty much just cleaned with reverse osmosis. And I believe you folks do have the capability for that technology. So I'll finish up quickly because this water in this bottle is actually labeled Rohnert Park, the friendly city. And there's nothing else on the label except come on in and get some more information. All right? So, here's the idea. Santa Rosa Water Strong, a donation program where you guys reverse osmosis your water, put it into empty bottles, and ask people to donate money to Santa Rosa Water to repair the structures burnt in the fires. All right? You're not cheating anybody. You're not competing with anybody in a sense. You're just basically using a commodity that we have and seeking donations. And there are people out there who will donate, and that would be something that could help us rather than putting it on to the ratepayers. Now, if you want to really learn about water and the whole boondoggle situations out there, excellent book from a guy in the Bay Area, the Pacific Institute. And basically, the water that we drink from the water fountain out front is just as clean as anything in these bottles. So thank you for your time. Looking forward to helping you on Santa Rosa Water Strong. Let's bring it together. It's all about marketing. I'll turn this off, put it back.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
It's a pleasure to help my city.
We are now on to referrals.
Chair Call, can I respond to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Board Member Grable, of course.
Mr. DeWitt, thank you. I was thinking actually, if you're talking about cost benefit, we should probably start a craft brewery. You know, it might make us a little bit more money. But it was something that occurred to me earlier that in the case of, if there ever is an issue with localized drinking water supply, you know, I'm not so hot on the plastic bottles, but you know, the Alhambra style, being able to deliver our water to our customers, you know, even in times of crisis where there might be an infrastructure issue, is something that occurred to me. So thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. I don't see any referrals. I do see 2 pieces of written communication. Is anybody interested in discussing either of these? Okay. Oh, Board Member Arden.
One of them is about the improvement project update. And I guess that raises a question in my mind. We've heard a lot of great things that have been done as a result of the fire. And actually a question raised by Mr. DeWitt. I just want to confirm, are we changing in any way our already budgeted CIP program as a result of the fire? Question number 1. And question number 2, are we going to be looking at a budget adjustment mid-year to deal with any of the extra efforts that have been necessitated by the fire?
Those are good questions, and staff is in the process of getting our arms around 2 key aspects of that. What we're faced with additional capital repair needs, infrastructure needs, as well as overall cash flow issues given the reduction in our rate base for some period going forward. To give you a sense of the scope of what we're talking about in terms of capital repair needs outside of the stormwater, and I'll touch on why I'm putting it outside, from the water and sewer enterprise, we're looking at somewhere on the order of maybe $10 to $15 million. So it's not a huge cost given the nature of the event and what it could be, yet it is certainly a significant hit to our planned CIP. And my long way of saying, yes, we are looking at our CIP, looking at reprioritizing the CIP to look to how we can accommodate these projects. Because certainly we are looking for FEMA reimbursement down the road, but it is down the road. What we hear is it could be as long as 10 years. Most recently, we did hear there is an opportunity to ask for part of the funding early, and I understand the city is going to be looking at that avenue, and we'll certainly bring our needs as part of that. So all of that is part of the picture. In terms of the loss of revenue, we're still rolling up those numbers. We believe It may be around 5%, maybe up to 7%, something like that. But that is very significant, certainly from a cash flow when we think about, for example, last year, rate increases around 2 to 3% to get a 7% immediate reduction. So in terms of that, and given all of the expenses ahead of us, we're looking at a range of things, and we'll certainly, as we start ramping up into the budget, be working closely with our budget subcommittee on both how can we think about level of service in terms of some activities we've been doing to reallocate resources to focus on these emerging issues, and also potentially thinking about proposing, recommending to the BPU and subsequently to the council an adjustment on what had been established as a 5-year rate increases. So we'll be talking about quite a lot, all those issues as we start gearing up for the budget cycle.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any subcommittee reports? Board member reports? Board member Dowd.
For you, Vice Chair Cowan, and Board Secretary Perez, I will not be in attendance at the December 7th BPU meeting.
Thank you. I do have something to say in the board member reports. At the request of the director, I would like to start an ad hoc subcommittee that will consider next steps for the agriculture irrigation contracts. I would like to appoint 2 people to this ad hoc subcommittee, Board Member Arnone and Board Member Grable. And thank you both for being willing to be part of this subcommittee. Director's report.
I do have some brief non-fire related activities, but we have, as you know, a very large operating enterprise that we're trying to keep going in light of the other activities that have emerged, so I'll touch on some of those. Staff is following and will be attending a number of public meetings ahead in regards to the State Water Board's recycled water policy, and this is something that has been in play for over a year, and there's a number of dynamics, and it is in the city's interest for us to stay very plugged into the process to ensure our kind of somewhat unique approach in level of reliance on our reuse system is accommodated in the new policy going forward that meets our needs. And as a water industry, we've been working, trying to stay united in a direction, but like all things, there's a process to that, and we'll keep the board apprised as that continues. Staff is participating in a committee that's charged with revising, updating the Sonoma-Marin Saving Water Partnership MOU that's expiring this summer. As you know, this has been a very successful partnership for the region, leveraging resources, consistent messaging, and really making advancements on a host of water conservation related activities. So we'll be keeping the board updated, and at some point we'll be bringing the MOU for consideration to the board. Staff is also participating on a technical advisory committee to Lawrence Berkeley National Labs to look at the water energy nexus and what barriers may be out there from a technology standpoint to adopting the most efficient approaches for groundwater and conjunctive use in California. And lastly, staff met with our Agriculture Operating Committee representatives to review concepts going forward as our some of our large long-standing contracts, particularly with some dairy farmers, are expiring, and we're really entering a bit of a new era in terms of more demand than supply, which is really the flip of where we were, say, 15, 20 years ago when these contracts were developed. And we'll be working with the just established ad hoc committee on that issue and keeping the board apprised as that moves forward. That concludes my remarks.
Board Member Grable.
Thank you, Director Ornstein. I would like to address 11.2. I realize we didn't address that. Going forward, I would like to table this discussion and agendize it in more formal way, obviously. But I had a conversation with Dr. McKaylee at Pepperwood Preserve, and she's obviously going through a tough time at the preserve. They had a lot of damage. They're in the burn area. They also had staff that lost family directly, so my heart goes out to them. But I would like to stress the importance going forward of really gathering as much data as possible, as many effective criterion modeling that we can have access to, not just for hydrology, flood protection, but also looking at the effects of climate change on fuels and fire, relative humidity, moisture content in our fuels, and how that could affect frequency of these events, but not just, in the broader context, but also specifically how the increased frequency and intervals of carbon resuspension, specifically in sediments and debris flows, has an effect on our water table and on the retention of groundwater, specifically a huge effect on the retention of groundwaters, and just what our understandings are typically of flood propensities, probabilities, is going to change, I think, substantially. So I do want to stress the importance of getting this on the agenda, and of course it's really at the discretion of Dr. McKaylee at Pepperwood, because they have a lot going on, and I would never attempt to add to that burden for them. So just something I'd like to keep in mind.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, with that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Santa Rosa, out there in the middle of everything.